We've had some truly horrendous live action video game adaptations, and just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, we got Borderlands, and now, hilariously enough, it has earned only $8.8 million in its domestic box office opening weekend on a $120 million budget. I have a few different things to show off, but before I get into the topic, if you enjoy the content I create, check out the links in the description, join the community in my live streams, and consider supporting through Patreon or YouTube memberships. Now, of course, as a video game fan, we have had some really good adaptations, like the recently released Fallout was pretty solid. We've, of course, gotten things like Uncharted wasn't completely hated. Tomb Raider wasn't completely hated. We got Sonic and Detective Pikachu, which were fantastic. But of course, there is a dark side to these adaptations, ones that people have hated, like Alone in the Dark from 2005 and House of the Dead from 2003, some of you Bowl's most infamous adaptations, but audiences have rated Borderlands slightly higher than those, but it doesn't seem like many people are actually going to see Borderlands given it only earned 8.8 million domestically. I wanted to head on over to this Variety article that talks about the box office over the weekend. Now, of course, there were some analysts who believed that this was going to blow It Ends With Us out of the water, that it was definitely going to make more, that it had to make more, but it didn't even come close. It says a film adaptation of this has been made, and it's not going well. This weekend's other new release, Lionsgate video game adaptation Borderlands with Cate Blanchett, misfired with 8.8 million from 3,125 theaters to start. Of course, Cate Blanchett was only one of the powerhouse actors in this. They really thought throwing Cate Blanchett into it, Kevin Hart as Roland into it, Jamie Lee Curtis as Dr. Tanith. They thought that that was going to work, but it didn't because, unfortunately, wow, these are pretty good actresses, Cate Blanchett and Jamie Lee Curtis. They are too old for the parts that they were hired for. Of course, these characters are 25 to 30. They were absolute bombshells in the video games, and then they decided to, in both cases, almost double their age, which is so disappointing. Again, I love Cate Blanchett, but she's not in her Galadriel days anymore, and that's fine. She just needs to be hired for different jobs, and they should have never aged these characters up. They wanted to throw as many names as possible into it, which I completely understand, but on the other hand, it just did not work. And Borderlands actually fared even worse at the overseas box office, with 7.7 million, bringing its global total to an embarrassing 16.5 million. Now, this movie has had quite a long development history. They actually started planning this back in 2013. Of course, it was not filmed all the way back then, it was filmed recently, but they had multiple directors, multiple casts, and they decided to land on Eli Roth, who now is, yes, probably going to go down in video game adaptation history as an equal to someone like U-Bowl. He created a lot of the early 2000 video game adaptations, like Alone in the Dark from 2005 and House of the Dead from 2003. Both of those actually have 11% on Rotten Tomatoes, and Borderlands does have a higher score, though there are significantly less people going to see it. We'll talk about that in a minute. But as it says, although nearly 60% of the production costs for Borderlands were covered by international pre-sales, according to studio sources, it's still a disastrous result for the film. So this is not confirmed. Take it with a grain of salt. Allegedly, 60% of the production costs for Borderlands were covered, but you have to look at the massive budget. It carried a production budget of 115 million, as well as marketing and distribution costs of 30 million. So they had to make a boatload of money for this to be considered successful. It would have needed to make over 230 million to even begin to see profit, and that clearly is not going to happen, judging by, again, the embarrassing 16.5 million it brought in for opening weekend. Now, of course, because so few people actually saw Borderlands, the scores on Rotten Tomatoes are not completely abysmal, but at the same time, they're still not good. The critics gave it a 9%, which it had initially debuted at a 0%. I talked about that in another video, but right now the audience score is sitting at a 50%, but it's not very shocking because far less people saw Borderlands than expected, so the scores are from people who thought they were going to like it, and they paid to see it, maybe because they're fans of the games and they were, trying to be generous. I think the scores will keep dropping, but if no one's watching the movie, you can't expect too many more reviews to be added. A 50%, though, is still abysmal, and it's no shock to see why. This movie was god-awful. There were so many small mistakes with the filming, the editing was extremely choppy, and so many of the jokes, as they tried to call them, were just so bad. I think a major problem with this was the fact that halfway through filming it, they decided to cut the rating in half. This was a PG-13 movie, and initially it was supposed to be rated R, but they decided halfway through filming, no, we're not going to go in that direction. So they toned back a lot of the fight scenes, a lot of the jokes, a lot of the action, and we ended up just getting this super watered down movie, which again has actresses and actors who are complete miscasts. The jokes are bad, the action's bad, bad editing. I cannot believe that they put over $100 million into this pile of freaking trash. Taking a quick peek at the audience scores, there are some 4s, but there's primarily 1s to 3s. Lots of people saying dumb, horrible, walked out. The film leads are way too old to fit the characters' profiles, coupled with hideous and ugly visuals. One of the worst films I've ever seen. I counted kernels in my bag of popcorn waiting for it to end. I really loved the idea of a Borderlands film when I heard it, but I've just seen it and it's so boring. I was initially very skeptical because the visuals are so specific in Borderlands, and I knew that they were going to have to sacrifice that to a certain extent. I honestly didn't expect it to be this god awful, though. This is what happens when you hire amateurs. Eli Roth should have never gotten his hands on Borderlands. He's only made, B-level horror movies, very low budget ones, which is fine. Some of his creations have been decent, but he should have never been handed a production this large that had this much money on the line, and then you pair it with other bad, writers and again, actresses who do not fit character profiles, and it just turned into a pile of slop. So I will definitely be interested to see how week 2 goes, how this movie continues to fail. If we are going to see a massive dip in box office profits because they're already so low, I don't necessarily think we're going to see a massive drop. I think it's going to stay pretty steady because, again, it's not making a lot of money anyway. I will be keeping my eye on it, though, to see what happens, but so far, Borderlands is a complete and utter disaster for Lionsgate, and boy, oh boy, are people furious with them for messing up this badly. But that's all that I had to discuss in this video. Let everyone know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this, give it a like, and if you didn't, give it a dislike. I appreciate your support either way, but I'll talk to you all again in the next video really soon.